The price of victory. They say every man carries his own private doorway to hell. For Frank Sullivan, the 48-year-old owner of Philadelphia's premier fighting establishment, the Warrior's Den, that door had been creaking open these past few months, its hinges rusted with suspicion and doubt. Frank stood at the panoramic window of his office, watching the first light of dawn kiss the Philadelphia skyline. 23 years as a Marine Force recon operator had taught him to read the subtlest signs of danger, a talent that now whispered warnings about his marriage of 15 years. His wife hadn't yet betrayed him, not physically at least, but the animal instinct honed in the dust and blood of Iraq told him something fundamental had shifted between them. The grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from Linda's father, chimed 5. Frank crossed to his desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and withdrew a worn leather journal. The binding cracked as he opened it, like an old friend groaning at being roused from slumber. He began to write, his penmanship precise and deliberate, a discipline maintained since his first deployment. The distance between Linda and I grows. War taught me to read terrain, emotional landscapes prove no different. Some battles can't be won with fists or firepower. This one, I fear, may be beyond even my training. He closed the journal with reverence, tucking it away before heading down to the main floor. The rhythmic thud of heavy bags punctuated by fighters' labored breathing welcomed him, the heartbeat of the establishment he'd built after leaving the service. Young men from good neighborhoods and bad alike came to test themselves in his octagon. Frank stopped at its edge, arms crossed over his chest, still powerful despite the approach of 50. His presence created a gravity well that demanded excellence from everyone in the room. "Keep those elbows tucked, Charlie." His voice cracked like summer lightning, causing the young fighter to instantly correct his form. "That gap in your defense is an invitation to dreamland." As he watched the sparring session, Frank unconsciously massaged the rope of scar tissue that twisted around his left wrist. The training hall sounds faded, replaced by the distinctive pop-pop-pop of gunfire in Fallujah, the sandpaper grit of Iraqi dust, the copperpenny smell of blood pooling beneath his men. 12 years had passed since that ambush had claimed his entire squad, leaving him the sole survivor with injuries that ensured the Sullivan bloodline would end with him. Sometimes, in the blackest hours of night, he still wondered why he'd been spared. "Boss," a voice pulled him back to present reality. Miguel, his youngest trainer, stood at his elbow. "New guy at the front desk. Says he served with the 2nd Marines in Anbar Province." Frank nodded, but his attention had already snagged on movement across the facility. Through the glass partition separating the psychologist's office from the main floor, he watched his wife Linda, 40 years old and still turning heads, escorting a tall, athletic man into her private consultation space. This must be Mason Cooper, the rising MMA prospect she'd mentioned with increasing frequency over dinner these past weeks. Young, handsome. Something in their body language, the unconscious choreography of their movements, pinged Frank's threat radar, the same sixth sense that had once saved his life in war. Inside her office, decorated in calming blues and grays, Linda arranged her collection of small ceramic elephants, a tradition started by her brother Michael before his death. Mason sat opposite her, nervously drumming his fingers against the arm of the leather chair. His recent panic attack before a crucial fight had surprised everyone in his camp, but they'd managed to keep it from the press. "Tell me about your father, Mason," Linda said softly, noting how his shoulders tensed at the question. She observed his slight stutter emerging under stress, a detail she automatically recorded in her professional notes. I barely remember his face," Mason replied hoarsely. "Just how he looked laid out on the canvas. I was 12. You know what's really messed up? I was angry at him that day. He promised to take me fishing, but when they offered him that bare-knuckle fight and the money that came with it, he wanted to buy me a new rod and reel." Linda felt something shift in her chest. The parallels to her brother's story were striking. Michael hadn't survived the trauma that ended his athletic career. Her professional eye caught Mason unconsciously clenching and unclenching his fists, a classic sign of suppressed emotion. "And your mother, how did she handle it?" Linda asked, though she already knew the answer from his file. Mason stood and moved to the window, broad shoulders rigid beneath his compression shirt. "She still can't watch my fights. Says I betrayed Dad's memory by choosing what killed him." That evening, in the Sullivans' colonial-style home in Chestnut Hill, Frank methodically diced vegetables for a salad, the military precision of his knife work a small reminder of his former life. Linda spoke animatedly about her new patient, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal, eyes brighter than they'd been in months. "He's remarkably resilient," she said, stirring sauce at the stove. "Can you imagine? After his father died, his mother absolutely forbade boxing, but he found ways to train anyway." Frank's knife paused mid-chop, something in his wife's voice. He studied her more carefully. New blouse, more attention to makeup. When had that started? A week ago? A month? Was his only response as he tipped the vegetables into a wooden bowl. "How's your Olympic team prospect coming along?" Linda faltered mid-sentence, as if suddenly remembering she had other patients. "Oh, right on schedule." She turned back to the stove, avoiding his gaze. "It's just that Mason's case, Mr. Cooper's case, requires additional attention right now." Dinner passed in their now customary silence. They'd lost the art of personal conversation years ago, hiding behind discussions of work and household minutiae. Frank remembered when it started, after the army doctors explained that his wartime injuries meant he could never father children. Linda had said it didn't matter, but something had fractured between them that day. The following weeks passed in a blur. Linda's evenings at the office grew longer. "Complicated case," she explained. Frank would nod silently, immersing himself in organizing a new tournament. But his military training never slept. He cataloged each detail. New perfume, more deliberate makeup, slightly more revealing outfits for therapy sessions. He noted how her posture changed when heading to yet another consultation, how her eyes lit up when discussing her patient's progress. Meanwhile, in Linda's office, professional boundaries were eroding with each session. She caught herself admiring Mason's fluid movements as he paced. Her heart accelerated when he flashed his rare, boyish smile. "You know," he said one evening, gazing out at the Philadelphia skyline, "when I'm in the cage, I feel like my father's watching. I can't let him down, can't show weakness." In that moment, Linda realized she'd completely lost her professional distance. She saw in Mason not just a patient but a reflection of her brother, the one she couldn't save. But there was something else too, something far more dangerous. And Frank simply waited. Observe, analyze, plan, the scout sniper's creed, and always prepare for the worst. Each evening he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the city lights blur beneath him. A new tournament was taking shape in his mind, something special, something personal. Everyone has their own private entrance to hell. Sometimes we invite others to step through it with us. Frank understood this better than most. He'd seen his hell in the blood-soaked streets of Fallujah, and now, it seemed, the time had come to share it with others. The envelope lay on Frank's desk like an IED awaiting detonation. Plain white, no return address, slipped discreetly into his personal mail. Inside, several glossy photographs. Linda and Mason at the coffee shop across from the gym, her hand lingering on his shoulder near Rittenhouse Square. Their silhouettes framed in her office window late one evening. Frank studied the images with the same detached analysis he'd once applied to intelligence reports before combat operations. "Thought it would hurt more," he wrote in his journal, each letter meticulously formed. His military precision maintained even now. He checked his watch, 4:30 a.m. Training would begin in 30 minutes, and no one could suspect his world had just imploded. That same morning across town, Dr. Samuel Wilson, his old friend from Walter Reed and now Philadelphia's leading neurosurgeon, examined medical scans in his office. His massive frame hunched over the desk while his thick fingers flipped through a patient file. "You sure you want to know this, Frank?" Sam raised his eyes to his friend. "Patient confidentiality." "Absolutely, brother," Frank cut him off. Wilson sighed heavily and turned his monitor. "Look here, spinal injury C5, C6. There's already nerve compression. One more hard impact at the wrong angle and this kid could end up paralyzed. He should have quit professional fighting 6 months ago." Frank studied the images with detached interest. Like puzzle pieces, the events of recent weeks assembled into a coherent picture. This explained why Mason always winced during certain movements. Meanwhile, in Linda's office, another drama unfolded. Mason sat slumped forward, his usually confident posture betraying exhaustion and pain. "Mom's getting worse," his voice sounded hollow. "Cancer. The doctors say there's a clinic in Boston, but it costs a fortune." Linda caught herself reaching for his shoulder. The contact lasted a second longer than professional boundaries permitted. "Mason, you can't carry this burden alone." She struggled to keep her voice steady. He raised his eyes to hers, and the raw gratitude she saw there made her breath catch. "God, what am I doing?" flashed through her mind, but it was already too late. That evening, Frank called a press conference. Camera flashes strobed like artillery fire as he announced the new Warriors Legacy tournament. $2 million in prize money, unprecedented format, the nation's top fighters. "This won't be just a tournament," his voice projected calm authority. "This will be a test of character." From the corner of his eye, he watched Mason lean forward in the front row at the mention of the prize money. Linda sat beside him, face pale. She recognized this tone from her husband, the voice he used when making life-changing decisions. The following weeks became a whirlwind. Mason trained obsessively, despite increasingly frequent episodes of pain. Each morning began with a ritual kissing his father's old gloves, a tradition he never broke. "You shouldn't be doing this," Linda pleaded after a particularly grueling training session, seeing him struggle to turn his head. "I have to," his jaw clenched tight. "I'll win and get the prize money for Mom's treatment, for her, for Dad, for myself." In his obsession, Linda increasingly noticed alarming parallels with her brother. The same determination to push beyond limits, the same disregard for pain and danger. The realization terrified her. And Frank observed it all with the cold precision of a chess master. Each evening he remained in his office late, constructing the tournament bracket. He knew exactly who Mason should fight and when, ensuring his injury would reach critical mass by the finals. The climax came on a Friday evening. Linda had stayed at the gym later than usual, filing paperwork. When she emerged from her office, Frank waited in the corridor, leaning against the wall. "How's the work with Mr. Cooper progressing?" he asked with deceptive casualness. Linda froze. Something in his tone made her blood run cold. "It's going according to plan." She struggled to keep her voice even, but her hands trembled. "Is it?" Frank slowly extracted the envelope of photographs from his pocket. "Seems to me things have strayed considerably from the original plan." Linda stared at the images, feeling the floor tilt beneath her. All their meetings, all the touches, all the glances, now it looked so obvious. "Frank, she began, but he raised his hand, silencing her. "Don't," his voice was quiet, but each word struck like a lash. "Just tell me one thing. Do you know about his injury?" Linda paled further. "What injury?" In that moment, Frank realized two things. First, his wife had genuinely fallen in love with another man. Second, she had no idea she was pushing him toward possible death in the ring. "Your patient is hiding a serious spinal injury," he said evenly. "A few more hard hits at the wrong angle and he could be paralyzed, or worse." Linda pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes widening in horror. Frank continued speaking, his tone measured and precise. "And you know what's interesting? He'll fight anyway, because he needs money for his mother's treatment, because he's obsessed with proving something to his dead father, and because the person who should have stopped him wasn't the right person after all. The Warriors' den arena hummed like a disturbed beehive. Day one of the Warriors' Legacy tournament had packed the stands. News of the record prize money had spread nationwide. Frank stood backstage, watching the crowd through a narrow gap in the curtain. His usually impassive face showed a trace of satisfaction. The first phase of his plan was proceeding perfectly. Mason prepared for his first fight in the locker room. His hands trembled slightly as he removed his father's gloves from his bag, worn, weathered, but carefully preserved all these years. After kissing them as always, he winced from a sharp pain in his neck. "You need to withdraw from the tournament," Linda's voice shook. She stood in the doorway, pale and haggard after yesterday's confrontation with her husband. "Mason, this injury—" "Don't start," he cut her off. "I'm fine." But they both knew it was a lie. After her conversation with Frank, Linda had spent a sleepless night reviewing medical literature. Nerve compression in the cervical spine was effectively a death sentence for a fighter under certain circumstances. Mason's first fight lasted less than 2 minutes. His opponent, a young, inexperienced fighter from Texas, never stood a chance. Lightning-fast strikes, a takedown, a chokehold, and it was over. The crowd erupted. No one except Linda noticed how Mason momentarily leaned against the wall outside the ring, fighting dizziness. That evening, Frank sat in his office reviewing fight footage. On his laptop screen, he paused on a frame showing Mason executing a takedown, noting the barely perceptible coordination issue. "Perfect," he murmured, making a note in his journal. His phone vibrated. A message from the Boston Medical Center confirmed receipt of the first payment for Mason's mother's treatment. Frank smiled grimly. No one knew he had anonymously funded the full treatment course. His mother raised a worthy warrior. She'll get what her son risked his health for. But for other transgressions, payment must still be made, he thought, remembering the photographs of his wife with another man. Meanwhile, in a small diner on the outskirts of Philadelphia, Linda and Mason sat at a corner booth. Their hands touched across the table, a simple contact that felt simultaneously right and utterly forbidden. "I can't do this anymore," Linda whispered. "Every time you step into that cage, I think about Michael, about how he died in the ring." "I'm not your brother," Mason interrupted sharply. The fanatic gleam in his eyes increasingly frightened her. "And I won't lose, can't lose. You've seen my fights, I'm getting stronger." "No," Linda thought, "you're becoming obsessed, just like him." Memories of her brother flooded back. His final months, his fixation on returning to competition after his injury, the fatal decision. The following days blurred into a kaleidoscope of fights. Mason advanced through the tournament bracket, leaving a trail of defeated opponents. Each victory came harder, each movement requiring more effort. But no one except Linda seemed to notice how, after fights, he spent increasingly longer periods in the locker room, recovering. Frank, meanwhile, spent evenings in the small home gym he'd built in his basement. Here, he trained Ethan, a 15-year-old from a troubled family whom he'd taken under his wing several months ago. "Boss, is it true they teach you secret killer moves in the Marines?" Ethan asked one evening, practicing combinations on the heavy bag. Frank studied the boy, increasingly recognizing his younger self. The same hunger for knowledge, the same persistence, the same hidden pain behind his eyes. "The most important thing they teach in the Marines, kid," he replied, "is to always remain human. Don't do stupid things. Think with your head, not just your fists." In the quarterfinal bout, what Linda feared most finally happened. After a particularly vicious blow, Mason momentarily lost spatial awareness. He won the fight, but the cost of victory kept rising. "This madness needs to stop," she told him afterward while treating a cut above his eyebrow. "You can see what's happening." Mason caught her hand and pressed it to his cheek. The gesture, so intimate and vulnerable, broke her heart. "I'm almost there," he whispered. "2 more fights, just 2 more, and I can fix everything. Mom will get her treatment, I'll open my own gym. We can be together." Linda recoiled as if struck. His words, his plans carried a feverish obsession that increasingly frightened her. With terrifying clarity, she suddenly realized she hadn't fallen in love with a real person, but with an image she'd created, someone she thought she could save. But it seemed she couldn't. That same evening, Frank sat in his home office when a knock came at the door. Linda stood on the threshold, the first time in weeks she'd returned home before midnight. "You knew," she said without preamble, "knew about his injury and organized this tournament anyway. You planned all of this." Frank silently studied his wife. Her eyes swam with fear, not for herself but for another man. Once she'd looked at him that way when he departed for each mission. "And you knew you were betraying me." His voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Yet you continued anyway. So which of us is committing the greater sin?" The semi-final bouts of the Warriors' Legacy tournament began on a cloudy Saturday evening. The arena crackled with anticipation. The crowd sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. Frank stood ringside. His face, illuminated by harsh spotlights, seemed carved from granite. He watched Mason climb the steps, noting every detail: the barely noticeable stiffness in his shoulders, slightly delayed head movements, perspiration on his forehead even before the bout began. In the locker room before his entrance, Mason checked his phone and reread, for the 100th time, the message from the Boston Clinic. "We are pleased to inform you that an anonymous benefactor has funded Mrs. Cooper's complete treatment course. Whoever it was, that money gave his mother a chance. But now, this was about more than just her." The semifinal proved brutal. Mason's opponent, a seasoned fighter from Nevada, knew about his injury. Rumors had spread through the locker rooms. Every strike targeted his neck and upper back. By the end of the second round, Mason could barely turn his head. Linda watched from the front row, her knuckles white with tension. She saw what others missed: microscopic pauses before each movement, labored breathing, moments of lost coordination. "Just like then with Michael," flashed through her mind, and memories of her brother crashed over her in a new wave of panic. After the fight, which Mason somehow won, Linda found Frank in his office. He sat at his desk, reviewing match footage on a large monitor. "We need to talk." Her voice was hoarse with suppressed emotion. Frank silently paused the video. The screen froze on Mason's face during a particularly powerful impact, a mask of both pain and obsession. "About what? How you fell in love with a man you were supposed to be treating, or how you betrayed not just me, but your professional principles." Linda sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Frank, I know I'm guilty, but what you're doing, it's murder." "No," he stood and moved to the window. "Murder is what he's doing to himself, and what you're allowing him to do." His voice held no anger, only fatigue and something else, either disappointment or regret. He turned to her, and Linda suddenly saw in his eyes the pain he'd always so carefully concealed. "You know what's funny?" he continued quietly. "I truly loved you, even when I couldn't give you children, even when I watched you gradually pull away, even when I noticed the first signs of your betrayal." Linda felt tears welling up. For the first time in years, Frank was speaking about his feelings, and it was breaking her heart. That same evening, Mason learned the truth about his injury. A doctor, an old friend of his father's, showed him the scans and reports. "One more serious impact and you could be paralyzed," the physician said. "Permanently. You'll be wheelchair-bound, fed with a spoon. Think about it, besides your sick mother who'll take care of you." Mason stared at the scans but saw something else. His father's face before his final fight, his mother's smile in the hospital ward, Linda's eyes filled with worry and love. "I can't stop," he whispered, "not now." Returning home, he stood before his bathroom mirror, examining the bruises and abrasions covering his body. In his reflection, he no longer saw a rising MMA star but a man walking the edge of an abyss. Somewhere deep inside, he understood his obsession with victory had transformed into something dark and dangerous, but he couldn't stop. Linda witnessed these changes in him. During their recent meetings, she increasingly felt she didn't recognize the man she'd fallen for. His eyes gleamed feverishly, his speech grew more erratic, and his plans for the future took on an increasingly manic quality. "After I win, we'll leave," he said, packing nervously around her office. "I'll open my own gym, train kids, show everyone I'm the best." "Who are you trying to prove this to?" she wanted to ask, but remained silent. She remembered these very intonations in her brother's voice before his final, fatal decision. The press conference day before the finals dawned unusually humid. Journalists from across the country packed the Warriors' Den conference hall. Frank sat at the center of the presidium table, Mason to his right, pale but determined. Linda watched from the back rows, feeling the air crackle with tension. "Mr. Sullivan," a young reporter stood up, "is it true you personally designed the tournament bracket?" "Yes," Frank allowed himself a slight smile. "I wanted each fighter to have the opportunity to demonstrate their true character." Mason flinched as if struck. Frank's words seemed to carry an additional meaning. Their eyes met, and for a moment, a spark of understanding passed between them. Both knew tomorrow's bout would be about more than just a title or money. This would be a fight for something far greater. The day of the final bout began long before dawn. Frank sat in his home office, rereading the latest entry in his journal. Today it ends, not as everyone might wish, but as it must. The first rays of sunlight painted the sky the color of old blood, which struck him as an ominous sign. He removed a worn photograph from his safe, the final picture of his unit before that fateful ambush in Iraq. Young, smiling faces. None lived to see sunset that day. Across town, Mason spent the morning in a small chapel he visited before every important fight. His knee throbbed mercilessly after the semifinal, and his neck. He tried not to think about his neck. Before him lay his father's gloves, worn, saturated with the sweat and blood of 2 generations of fighters. "Today I'll do it, Dad," he whispered, stroking the cracked leather. "I'll become who you wanted me to be." His phone interrupted him, his mother calling from the Boston clinic. Her voice sounded unusually energetic. "The doctors say the treatment is working better than expected. Mason, honey, you shouldn't risk your health." "I have to, Mom," he cut her off. "This isn't about money anymore, it's about something more." Linda spent the night sorting through her brother's old belongings. The box of his sports trophies, unopened for years, now lay before her. Michael gazed from photographs, young, handsome, obsessed, just like Mason. She found his final note. "Sorry, sis, I can't live as a cripple, I'm out." History repeated itself with frightening precision. By noon, the Warriors' Den resembled a disturbed anthill. Television crews set up cameras, bookmakers took final bets, medics checked equipment. Frank methodically circled the arena, verifying every detail. In the locker room, he found Ethan, his young protege, attempting to mimic a fighting stance before the mirror. "Boss," the boy turned to him, eyes bright with admiration, "you'll win today, right?" Frank placed a hand on his shoulder. "You know, kid, sometimes victory isn't about destroying your opponent. Sometimes it's about saving him from himself." An hour before the fight, Linda burst into Mason's locker room. She looked exhausted, dark circles underlining her eyes. "The latest scans," she threw a medical report onto the bench. "You can't fight, it's suicide." Mason didn't even glance at the papers. "You don't understand. This is my only chance to prove." "What, to whom?" Her voice broke. "Your dead father, your mother who's begging you to stop. The money for her treatment isn't even needed anymore. Or is this about yourself?" He raised his eyes to her, and Linda recoiled. She hadn't seen such a look since her brother's death. The expression of someone who had already crossed some internal line. "I loved you," she whispered. "But now I realize I loved a ghost, an image I created myself." When the bell rang announcing the start of the fight, the stands exploded with roars. Frank and Mason met in the center of the ring. Two fighters, two destinies, two paths that had intersected in the most unexpected way. The first round passed in tactical struggle. Frank deliberately maintained distance, studying his opponent's movements. Military training demanded thorough reconnaissance before the decisive attack. He noticed how Mason favored his right side, how he winced during sharp head turns. Between rounds, Linda paced ringside, beside herself with anxiety. She watched her husband methodically and calculatingly backing Mason into a trap, saw how her lover's movements grew increasingly restricted with each minute. History repeated itself, but now she was merely a spectator. The second round began with a furious assault from Mason. He sensed his strength ebbing and decided to stake everything on one desperate push. Frank calmly absorbed the onslaught, allowing his opponent to exhaust himself. Years of service had taught him the primary lesson: patience. During the break before the third round, Mason sat in his corner, breathing heavily. Everything swam before his eyes, his neck burning with pain. He looked at the stands and saw ghosts. His father, who died just like this in the ring. Linda's brother, who chose death over life as a cripple. All those fighters who broke, unable to withstand the pressure. The third round proved decisive. After a particularly vicious blow, Mason momentarily lost orientation. Frank saw the perfect moment for a finishing move, one that could end not just the fight but the young fighter's life. And no one would dare accuse him. This was professional sport. These things happened. Time seemed to stop. Frank's entire life flashed before his eyes. The dusty roads of Iraq, faces of fallen comrades, years with Linda, silent evenings in an empty house where children's laughter would never sound. He saw in Mason's eyes the same fanatical gleam he'd once seen in the eyes of the boy's father before his final opponent. The same fire that burned in Linda's brother's eyes before his final step. In a split second, he made his decision. Instead of the lethal strike, Frank unexpectedly kicked Mason's knee. A crack echoed over the ring like a dry branch snapping in two. Mason collapsed onto the canvas, his face contorted with pain. The referee stopped the fight. Medics rushed to the ring. Linda darted to the stretcher, but Mason stopped her with a weak gesture. "Don't," he whispered. "I understand now. Your husband. He could have killed me but chose to save me today, from myself." His eyes no longer held obsession. Defeat, as often happens, proved more important than any victory. Frank watched this scene from his corner. He felt not the triumph of a winner but the strange peace of a man who made the right choice. Doctors were already examining Mason's knee. The injury would end his career in professional sports, but save his life. That evening in the empty warrior's den, Frank found a note from Linda. "You proved to be a better person than I thought. Forgive me. I know I can't wash away this shame. You won't be able to take me back. I'm leaving for Europe. It's better for everyone." He crumpled the note and approached the window. The city below lit up with evening lights. Somewhere there, in a Boston clinic, Mason's mother received treatment paid for by an anonymous benefactor. Somewhere there, Mason began to realize that losing sometimes matters more than winning. And here, in an empty hall, stood a man who today chose not to become a killer. A year later, Frank stood at his office window in the warrior's den, watching training in the hall below. Ethan, now an assistant coach, demonstrated basic stances to newcomers. A new photograph hung on the wall, Frank in the ring at the moment of his final victory. Beside it, the old picture of his unit from Iraq. Past and present merged into one. The morning mail brought a postcard from Zurich. Linda worked there with the Olympic team, finally finding peace in what she truly did best, helping athletes overcome their fears. "You were right," she wrote. "Sometimes you need to lose everything to find yourself." Across town, in a small sports center for orphan children, Mason Cooper finished another training session. His limp was noticeable, but his eyes no longer held that obsession. He'd learned to find victories in small things, in a child's smile after correctly executing a move for the first time, in his mother's proud gaze after successful treatment, in grateful parents' letters. That evening, Frank ran his hand along the spine of his old journal. It contained just one unfilled page. "Sometimes," he wrote, "victory isn't about breaking your opponent. Victory is about preserving the human within yourself."